On March 6, 2004, a tiny black kitten opened his eyes for the first time, nestled close to his mother in a cozy cardboard box. The world was a blur of warmth and fuzzy shapes, a ginger sibling curled up nearby, and a faint scent of milk in the air. His tiny paws wiggled as he took in the first sights of his new world, the soft purr of his mother comforting him as he mewed for the very first time. The world had slowly become bigger over the past weeks. New smells, new sounds, and the strange brightness beyond the box, where life began. But on this morning of June 3rd, 2004, everything felt different. Large hands gently lifted the small black body from the soft blanket, and the familiar warmth of siblings faded behind. The air smelled sharper here, filled with unfamiliar scents, plastic, fabric, and something like rain clinging to shoes. A carrier door creaked open. From the kitten's low perspective, the inside of the carrier looked like a cave made of pale walls and shadows. The ground shifted slightly as paws were set down on a towel that smelled faintly like another animal who had once been there. The opening closed with a click. The world became framed by a grid of small bars beyond them. Towering shapes moved and spoke in soft voices. The kitten didn't understand the words, only the tone: careful, hopeful, gentle. Then motion began. The floor vibrated beneath tiny paws as the carrier lifted. Light moved across the slits in streaks as outside passed by, not the still safe to the old place, but a journey. The kitten pressed its nose against the bars, whiskers brushing metal, listening to the rhythm of footsteps and the distant sound of birds. Somewhere inside its chest, a small uncertain feeling lived beside curiosity. The old life was ending, but the kitten didn't know that yet. It only knew it was being carried toward a place that smelled new. The tiny black kitten had only been in the house a few hours when the family introduced the string toy. It skimmed across the carpet, bright feathers fluttering, and the kitten instantly forgot every trace of uncertainty. He chased with oversized determination, sliding, missing, and pouncing again, while the humans laughed softly above him. Each near catch made him bolder, his steps less hesitant, his tail higher. The unfamiliar smells and rooms stopped mattering. The moving string gave the place a rhythm he could understand. At last he trapped it beneath both paws, and looked up, wide-eyed and proud, as if announcing that he now understood the rules of this new world. In that small victory, the family watched him realize what they already knew: he was home. That night the house finally grew quiet, and the kitten curled into the soft bed the family had placed beside the couch. The new smells were still everywhere: wood, carpet, people, but they no longer felt overwhelming, only warm and surrounding. He needed the blanket for a moment, circling twice before settling, ears flicking at distant nighttime sounds he didn't yet understand. A gentle hand brushed his back once, and the rhythm of voices faded into silence. For the first time since leaving the place he was born, nothing moved that needed chasing, and nothing felt uncertain. His breathing slowed, paws tucked beneath him, and he slept deeply, as if he had always belonged to this quiet room and the people inside it. One evening on February 9th, 2005, the family brings home a tiny red dot toy they found at shop, not realizing what they were about to start. The moment the dot appears on the carpet, he freezes, pupils huge, because this is not like a string or feather. It doesn't smell, doesn't make sound, and breaks every rule prey is supposed to follow. He chases it down hallways, across couches, even up walls, learning the layout of the entire house faster than an exploring ever could have taught him. For weeks afterward he waits in the same spot each night at the same time, staring at the drawer where the humans keep it, convinced the mysterious creature lives inside. It quietly becomes his first schedule, the moment every evening when the world turns into a hunt and the house feels completely mapped and understood. On March 6, 2005, the family decided the kitten deserved a celebration of his own, even if he didn't understand why the house suddenly smelled like treats. They tied a ribbon loose around his neck, set a tiny fish-shaped snack on a plate, and gathered around the living room floor, while he stared with wide confusion that quickly turned into excitement. He batted at the curling ribbon, pounced into crinkling wrapping paper, and chased crumbs that fell like treasure from the cake they pretended he had. Laughter filled the room each time he attacked the decorations instead of the food, until he finally collapsed in the middle of it all, happy overwhelmed. The family took pictures and called it his birthday, but to him it was simply the best day yet, a day where everyone watched him play, and every smell and sound meant he was exactly where he belonged. On the morning of December 25th, 2005, the kitten woke to a house that didn't feel quiet at all. Paper crinkled, footsteps moved quickly, and the air carried the strong smell of pine and unfamiliar decorations. He crept toward the glowing tree and froze, staring at the dangling ornaments that swayed just enough to look alive. Soon ribbons dragged across the floor, and wrapping paper slid like prey, and he launched into it, while laughter filled the room. He disappeared into boxes, batted at tinsel, and tried to climb the lowest branches before being gently lifted away. By afternoon he curled beneath the tree, surrounded by scattered scraps and warm voices, blinking slowly in the colored lights, certain that whatever this strange, bright day meant to the humans, it was clearly meant for him too. In January 2006, the house felt quieter than usual because the kitten no longer raced down the hallway in the mornings. He slept longer, ate little, and made small tired sounds that worried the family, so they gently placed him back into the carrier he barely remembered from months before. The car ride was softer this time, full of reassuring voices instead of excitement, and the building they entered smelled sharp and unfamiliar. A kind veterinarian listened to his chest, checked his eyes and nose, and explained he had a flu that many young cats get, but usually recover from with care. He went home wrapped in a warm towel, given medicine and extra attention, and spent several slow days resting, while someone always sat nearby. Soon the small appetite returned, then the curious wandering, and finally the sudden sprint across the living room that made everyone laugh with relief the moment they knew their playful companion was himself again. On October 31st, 2006, the house filled with unfamiliar costumes, rustling fabric, and the sound of the front door opening again and again as the family prepared to leave for trick-or-treating. The cat watched from the hallway, puzzled by masks and laughter, until the house suddenly became calm once they stepped outside. Orange light from a carved pumpkin flickered across the floor, and for a while he guarded the quiet rooms alone. Later, when the door finally opened and excited voices returned, they knelt beside him with crinkling bags, not just candy for them, but a small pile of his favorite treats saved just for him. He batted at the wrappers, then eagerly ate, while they told stories he didn't understand, their happiness settling around him like warmth. By the end of the night he curled near the glowing pumpkin, full and content, certain that whatever strange ritual had taken them away had also brought them right back to him. On New Year's night in 2007, the house stayed awake far later than the cat approved of, filled with music, talking, and the strange pop of distant fireworks. While the family gathered in the living room, he leapt onto the table to inspect the unfamiliar glasses and bottles left within reach. One curious nudge turned into a sliding wobble, and before anyone could react, a wine bottle tipped over the edge. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, and rolled across the wood without shattering, leaving the entire room frozen for a second before relieved laughter replaced the silence. The cat simply watched it spin, tail flicking, unaware he had nearly ruined the celebration, then sat proudly beside it as if he had meant to perform the trick all along. Between January 8th and January 15th, 2007, the cat experienced a journey unlike any he had known before, beginning with a long, humming ride in a carrier that smelled faint of home but moved for hours without stopping. The air grew warmer and carried strange outdoor scents when they arrived, and the new place held wide windows, bright sun, and unfamiliar bird calls that kept him perched and alert all day. Each morning he explored the temporary rooms careful, mapping corners and hiding spots, while his family came and went, returning with sandy shoes and laughter. At night he settled beside them, reassured by familiar voices even in this distant place, and watched moonlight spill across floors he would only know for a short time. By the final evening he had chosen a favorite windowsill and guarded it proudly, unaware the adventure was ending, but certain that wherever the people went next, that would be his territory too. On January 16, 2007, the carrier appeared again, and the familiar motion of travel returned, though this time the scents inside it already belonged to him. After a long ride, the door opened to the same rooms, the same corners, and the same quiet sounds he had learned months before. He stepped out careful, pausing at thresholds as if confirming each space remained where he remembered it. The windows held the usual view, and the resting spots had not moved, so his inspection grew shorter with each pass. By evening he had resumed his ordinary path through the house, eating, wandering, and settling into his preferred place as if the days away had only been a brief interruption in a pattern that continued unchanged. One afternoon on August 29, 2008, a long storm rolls in, and water begins racing down the glass in winding paths. He sits at the window far longer than usual, paw occasional touching the cold surface as drops merge, split, and slide away faster than anything he has chased before. Unlike toys or birds, this movement never stops, and never repeats the same pattern twice. For days afterward he returns to the same spot whenever clouds gather, waiting, because now the sky itself sometimes becomes something to watch. It quietly becomes part of his routine storms meet observation instead of sleep. On March 6, 2009, his family still set out treats and unwrap a toy the same way they did when he was small, but instead of attacking the ribbon and paper, he walks over calmly, sniffs each item once, eats slow, and then chooses to sit beside them rather than play. The celebration still happens, but it has shifted from excitement to participation. The family ends up spending more time petting him than encouraging him to chase anything, and he stays there the whole evening without wandering off. In November 2009, the weather cooled, and the house stayed closed more often, turning the windows into mirrors after sunset. One evening the cat noticed movement, where no outside view remained, a second cat pacing when he paced, and stopping when he stopped. He watched for a long time, approaching slow, then lifting a paw to touch the glass just as the other did the same. For several nights he returned to the same dark window, repeating the inspection as if trying to understand the rules of this silent presence that shared his territory but never smelled or made sound. Eventually he began to ignore it, not because it disappeared, but because it had become predictable, another part of the house that behaved exactly as expected. In April 2010, a new sound entered the house, a small mechanical hum that moved across the floor on its own path. The cat watched from the hallway as the round device emerged from beneath a chair and traveled in straight lines before turning sharp at walls. He followed at distance, observing each change in direction, then approached to tap it once before stepping back when it continued undisturbed. Over the next days he adjusted his routes around it, waiting for it to pass before crossing rooms, and occasional riding beside it as it worked. Eventually the sound became part of a daily pattern, and he no longer tracked it closely, only shifting slightly when it came near, treating it as another predictable object that occupied the house at regular times. In September 2010, the house changed in a way that did not move furniture or alter rooms, but shifted the daily pattern. One human began leaving early each morning and returning later than before, creating a longer quiet period in the middle of the day. The cat adjusted by relocating his sleeping places, choosing windows that held sunlight longer, and timing his movement to the sound of a door unlocking in the evening. After several weeks he waited there regularly before the handle turned, sitting still as footsteps approached. The change no longer required investigation, only anticipation, and it became part of a fixed rhythm he followed without interruption. In February 2011, the house became busy for several days with the movement of boxes and objects changing places. Chairs shifted, shelves emptied, and open spaces appeared where none had been before. The cat followed each change careful, revisiting rooms after every adjustment, and pausing where familiar paths no longer led to the same positions. By the end of the rearranging, his walking routes had altered slightly, corners now taken wider, and resting spots chosen differently. After a short period of observation, The new layout required no further attention, and his tail movements continued along updated paths that quickly became as routine as the old ones. On December 24, 2011, the house filled with more voices than usual as unfamiliar footsteps moved through rooms he normally crossed alone. Doors opened often, carrying in cold air and new scents that lingered on coats and shoes. The cat observed from a distance at first, choosing higher places where he could watch movement without interruption, then gradually walked between groups as the noise settled into steady conversation. Hands occasionally reached down to touch him, each different but gentle, and he accepted some before moving on to quieter spaces. By the evening he rested in a corner of the same room, no longer tracking every person, only shifting position when the crowd changed shape, treating the gathering as another temporary pattern within the house. In July 2012, a new object appeared near the back door, a flap that opened only when pushed. At first the cat approached cautiously, watching it move when the humans passed through, the outside air briefly entering with unfamiliar scents. After several days he nudged it once and stepped back as it swung, then tried again and crossed the threshold. The ground beyond felt different and carried constant motion in smell and sound, so he stayed close to the doorway at first, returning inside often. Over time he began short loops outward and back, learning the boundary of the yard and the reliable path to re-enter. Soon the opening no longer required observation. It became another route he used without hesitation as part of his regular movement between spaces. In May 2013, the cat noticed a small visitor begin appearing regularly in the yard, a bird that returned to the same branch each afternoon. Instead of brief glances, he stayed at the window longer, sitting without movement, while the outside activity continued beyond the glass. The bird followed consistent paths between the branch, the ground, and a nearby fence, and after several days the cat positioned himself before it arrived, already facing the direction it would come from. The routine repeated across many afternoons, neither crossing into the other's space, until the presence no longer required full attention. It became part of the background motion of the day, observed only when passing the window, then left behind as he continued his usual path through the house. In October 2014, the house gained a new regular sound, a small rectangular device placed on a table that lit up and played moving images each evening. The cat initially approached when voices came from it, circling the object and looking behind it to locate the source. After several days he began sitting nearby during its active hours, occasionally glancing at rapid movement across the screen before settling into rest beside it. Over time the light and sound no longer required investigation. He simply positioned himself within its warmth and steady noise, treating it as part of a night environment that signaled the end of a day's activity. In March 2016, the cat began choosing higher resting places more often than before, favoring the top of shelf near a warm vent that carried steady air. From there he watched the house rather than walking through it, tracking movement with his eyes instead of following it physically. He still made his usual routes, but less frequently, pausing midway and returning to the elevated spot sooner each day. After a few weeks the position became his default location during active hours, allowing him to observe the same tail patterns without needing to approach them. The arrangement required no adjustment from the household. His path had simply shortened, while his view expanded. In August 2017, the cat began spending more time near the warmest places in the house, choosing sunlight or vents even during active hours. His movements became slower and more deliberate, pausing halfway through rooms before continuing, then resting longer once he arrived. He still followed familiar routes each day, but with fewer repetitions, often watching activity pass instead of joining it. After some time the household adjusted naturally, placing soft blankets where he preferred to stop so he no longer needed to search for comfort. The change did not interrupt the routine, it simply shortened the distances between each pause in the pattern he already knew. In April 2019, the cat began waking earlier than the household, settling near the bedroom doorway before an alarm sounded. Each morning he waited there in stillness, no longer following movement through the house, but anticipating it before it began. After some time the first footsteps matched his position consistently, and the door opened to find him already present. The behavior repeated across many days until it became expected rather than noticed, a quiet meeting that marked the start of activity. Nothing else in the routine changed, but the beginning of the day now always included his silent presence before the rest of the house moved. In January 2021, the daily pattern of the house shifted again as the humans remained inside for much longer stretches of time. Rooms that were usually empty during the day now held quiet activity, and the cat adjusted by relocating his resting places to remain near them without being in the way. He no longer waited for evening footsteps. Movement occurred throughout the day, soft and repetitive. After several weeks he stopped checking empty rooms entirely, choosing instead to sleep within view of whichever space was occupied. The routine required fewer transitions, and his path through the house shortened to a series of nearby positions that changed only when the humans moved. In November 2023, the cat began spending longer periods simply watching the house at night after activity had ended. Instead of immediately sleeping when the lights dimmed, he remained awake in his usual place, tracking small movements, shifting shadows, distant sounds, and the occasional passing car light through the window. His movements during these hours were minimal, limited to repositioning for comfort rather than exploration. After some time the behavior became routine, part of a nightly cycle that occurred after the household settled. Morning found him already resting again, as if his active hours had quietly moved later without altering the rest of the day's pattern. In June 2030, the cat began responding more to familiar sounds than to movement. He no longer turned toward every passing shadow, but the specific noises of daily routines, a chair shifting, a cupboard closing, footsteps approaching, still drew his attention immediately. He positioned himself where these sounds were easiest to hear, often choosing places with clear paths of vibration through the floor. His activity followed the same schedule as before, though guided less by sight and more by the predictable rhythm of the house. The pattern of living continued unchanged, only the cues he used to follow it had shifted. In September 2036, the cat spent most of his time in a single room, where the temperature remained steady throughout the day. Rather than following activity through the house, he allowed the household to pass by him, acknowledging movement only when it came close. His routine narrowed to a sequence of nearby positions: resting place, water, food, and back again, each visited slow and without variation. The sounds of the rest of the home continued beyond the doorway, but he no longer investigated them, responding only when someone entered his immediate space. The pattern repeated each day, unchanged, forming a stable cycle centered entirely around one familiar area. In February 2040, the cat no longer moved between resting places during the day, remaining instead in a single position for long stretches, while the house continued around him. Activity passed within view rather than being followed, and he acknowledged it mainly when it came close enough to touch. His routine narrowed to brief, deliberate trips for food and water before returning to the same spot, each movement slower but consistent. The household adapted without disruption, placing familiar objects within easy reach so the pattern could continue unchanged. The days differed little from one another, defined more by repetition than by events, yet the structure remained intact. On March 11, 2041, the house followed its usual quiet morning pattern, but the cat remained awake longer after sunrise than he normally did. Instead of returning to sleep, he watched the room steadily, while soft sounds of routine activity moved around him. When someone sat nearby, he shifted closer and stayed there without wandering off again, remaining present through the entire cycle of the morning. Nothing in the environment had changed, yet the stillness lasted longer than on other days, as if the observation itself had become the activity. By afternoon he resumed his usual rest, and the day continued without interruption, leaving only a slightly extended moment within an otherwise familiar pattern. In October 2042, the cat's daily routine shortened further to only a few movements spaced throughout the day. Rather than waiting in anticipation of activity, he remained in place while familiar sounds passed around him, acknowledging them only with brief attention before resting again. When someone entered the room, he adjusted slightly toward their presence and stayed there for extended periods without relocating afterward. The arrangement of nearby objects remained unchanged, allowing each day to follow the same quiet sequence from morning to night. The pattern no longer required observation, it simply continued. On March 6, 2044, the household followed a familiar routine but remained gathered in the same room longer than usual. The cat stayed in his usual resting place, while small objects were placed nearby, and quiet voices remained close throughout the day. Hands reached down to touch him more often, pausing without prompting him to move, and he remained where he was, acknowledging each presence briefly before settling again. The arrangement around him did not change, only the duration of attention did, and the day passed with fewer departures than normal. By evening the house returned to its regular quiet, leaving the routine intact, only marked by a longer period of shared presence within it. In late March 2044, the daily routine continued with little variation, though the cat spent nearly all of his time resting in the same place, where the light remained gentle throughout the day. Movement in the house carried on around him, acknowledged only when it came close enough to be felt rather than followed. Hands occasionally reached to adjust the blanket beneath him, and he remained where he was, settling again after each small interruption. The pattern of the days no longer required movement to maintain it. Presence alone was enough for the routine to continue. In early April 2044, the house remained quiet through the afternoon as light moved slowly across the room and settled near his resting place. The cat stayed there, breathing steady, while the familiar sounds of the home continued at distance. Someone sat nearby for a long time without speaking, occasionally resting a hand beside him, and no part of the routine asked him to move. As evening approached, the room grew dim, and the daily pattern simply did not continue past its usual point. The house stayed the same, holding the same arrangement and quiet, only without further movement to mark the passing hours.